Now I begin to be a disciple. Let fire and cross, flocks and beasts, broken bones, dismemberment come upon me, so long as I attain to Jesus Christ. These are the words of first Christian martyr Ignatius of Antioch. Now, he was the bishop of Antioch. And as I said, first Christian martyr that we know, or at least that is popularly recorded. So he is going to be taken by 10 Roman guards from Antioch to Rome. And in Rome, he's going to be, we believe, fed to the wild beasts. So this is recorded much later on. So many don't know for sure if we know he very likely was martyred there in Rome. We know he writes about being taken to Rome to be martyred. He writes 7 letters as he kind of travels from Antioch to Rome. But a lot of the stuff just remains a mystery as to why they took him by land rather than sea, why they gave him such freedom to write letters and actually meet with Christian groups along the way. Some of the best explanations are saying that the guards were probably sent there for several reasons, and picking up Antioch was one of many. They didn't care very much, probably didn't see him as much of a threat, so they let him meet with people along the way. Might have made their whole journey safer, kind of being nicer to people rather than trying to hinder them. But all we really know is from others that wrote about him and these 7 letters that he wrote along the way. Now, Ignatius here kind of pleads with the Christians in Rome to stop trying to get him exonerated. He's like, if you accomplish your task, you're not allowing me to die as I've lived, like my Lord. So we see here that he's probably accused of the charge of atheism, which is odd because he believes in God, he believes in Jesus Christ. But many early Christians were in fact charged with atheism because they didn't believe in the Roman gods. And so the Romans felt that unless you worship to their gods, that their nation would be weak and then they wouldn't prosper. So only the Jews had kind of a religious exemption, if you will, because they were monotheists. But Christians, once they were kind of cast out of the temple and amongst the Jews, kind of lost that exemption. So the Christians were kind of seen as a threat to society, if you will, because the Jews just kind of stayed to themselves, or the Christians were among society. And so Romans felt that this kind of threat to the Roman way of life must be suppressed. So that's why sometimes it's hard for us to understand why they would take this bishop and throw him to wild beasts to be killed. But think of it today as someone who would try to overthrow the government, or a spy, right? Someone who is responsible for tyranny. They saw it as, hey, if you won't just pour out a drink libation or an offering to the to Rome or to the emperor or to the Roman gods, then if you can't do that simple thing, you must have something up your sleeve. You must have something nefarious planned. That was largely how they saw it. But remember here, Ignatius, he lived like Christ, so he believed that he wanted to die like him. And so this is an important theme, I think, that many of us don't ever, we don't want to die like Christ, but we don't even want to live like Christ. So he sought both in life and death to emulate his Lord. And that's a very, I think, inspiring thing to think about. But as he meets with these people along the way and writes these letters, I think he's an important figure because really every branch of Christianity, both Roman, what's called Roman Catholics today, the Western branch of Catholicism, the Eastern Orthodox or Eastern kind of branch, and then Protestants as well, kind of all read these letters kind of with different lenses and ultimately interpret them or try to make him their own. And the part of the challenge is, what did the early church mean by these things, or mean by these things, such as Catholic Church, right? He's the first to use the term Catholic Church. So, of course, the Western Church is going to say, see, he admits the bishop there was the Catholic Church, and that's why the Pope should have supremacy. And anyone apart from that is not part of the true church, right? And the Eastern Orthodox are going to look at it and say, well, no, he's not backing the idea of a Pope. It has to do with the bishops, right? They all have authority, and then you don't separate from the bishops. And obviously, the Protestants look at the presbyters or elders as similar to the bishop in ancient times. And so each one, as I said, will kind of see him through a different lens and make them their own. And there's even some who feel that, in fact, John Calvin was one who felt that his letters weren't completely genuine, that people extrapolated over time and added to them. And some dismiss his writings completely. And so if you do that, you can have a very different form of Christianity or Protestantism than the big three that I just mentioned. And what does he mention in these letters, right? Well, one, he talks about, apart from the bishop, right, or apart from church leadership, that there should not be baptism or the Lord's Supper that takes place. So he firmly grasps these within the church and within the church hierarchy. All right, and so that's why some people feel that later the church hierarchy added in to try to kind of make it more authoritative. Hey, this is the guy who's possibly discipled by John. Him and Polycarp, many said, were actually disciples of John. But if this is true, then this is the earliest writings we have outside of the New Testament. So this was, again, a very, not quite authoritative, but a lot of weight should go into what's said here if this is indeed genuine. And I would say most probably look at it as a majority of these letters, because there are a different group called the pseudo-Ignatius letters that most reject. So there's 7 that many feel are genuine, and then there's these other, like, I think 9 or 10 that say this was clearly added later, these aren't genuine. But he mentions baptism, communion, Lord's Supper as being part of this. There has to be done by a church leader, if you will. Not anyone can do these things. And so that's where in the more formal branches, even of Protestantism, you have this view held, definitely within Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox. Whereas many Protestants would be like, no, anyone can baptize, anyone can administer the Lord's Supper. But if you see early on that they were actually doing that, then that would be a problem if you hold these writings to be true. We know for sure that he wrote against the Ebionites, okay, that were this, here's a quote, he says, "It is outrageous to try to live under the Jewish law." This is a paraphrase, sorry, not a direct quote, but he basically says it's an outrageous thing to try to live under the Jewish law, or still be Judaism, and name the name of Christ, okay? So these Ebionites were trying to still live under Jewish laws or customs and be Christians. And he's like, this is outrageous. And he also spoke against a group, the Docetists, that believe that Jesus merely appeared to be a man or appeared to be human, and that he didn't have a real flesh and bones and body. And this is important because the Christian doctrine of the resurrection of the body. So again, we see these two things against that there's somehow these Jewish Sabbaths and laws that must be still attained to as Christians, and 2, that the Christians did believe in the resurrection of the body, that Jesus indeed was fully God and fully human. And he wrote on the idea too of the deity of Christ, on the Trinity. We see him clearly state, right, that Christ is immortal, if you will, prior to his incarnation. He takes on human flesh, which ultimately is begotten in time, but the Son, as part of the Godhead, is not begotten, right? That he's not he's not created, we should say. So the only begotten is revealed in time and space to us, but the Son of God, right, is, as the second member of the Trinity, is eternal or co-eternal with God. But we use the term begotten, meaning he is of God, but brought forth as man for us. So this is, again, early writing. This isn't something that developed, sometimes people say, in the 3rd century under Constantine. This is very early, after the apostles. He is the first to equate the Lord's Day with the Sabbath outside of Scripture. The Apostle John in Revelation talks about being on the Lord's Day, right? But he clearly defines that we are no longer under or worship on the Jewish Sabbath, but rather on Sunday, the Lord's Day, which is the day he rose from the dead. He says in this quote, "If then those who had walked in ancient practices attained unto newness of hope, no longer observing Sabbaths, but fashioning their lives after the Lord's Day, on which our life also arose through him, How shall we be able to live apart from him? So to kind of summarize that, he's basically saying our life started on the Lord's day, meaning through Christ, through the resurrection. So how could we live apart from it? So you see this, the importance of the local church, of the church body, even the church hierarchy, if you will, that there is a system that Christ created, and we have no life apart from Christ, and we have no life apart from the church, and no life apart from worshiping on the Lord's day. So there, again, this is a very, if he indeed wrote this is a very impactful statement, right? That causes all Christians, makes us all obligated to worship the Lord on the Lord's day, and sees this as an integral part of our life. So for that, I think he is this big figure that we must weigh, but also just to see the one thing that's not disputed or no one denies is that he was a martyr that was ready to give his life for the faith, and that he not only died, but lived in the model of Jesus Christ. And I think we should all seek that. And for him, he didn't fear death. He saw death, the fear of death, as that great obstacle for the Christian. And if the Christian can overcome the fear of death, then we have true faith in Christ. So may we live with that hope. Many of us, most of us, probably anyone who sees this video is not living under persecution or martyrdom. But we, day in and day out, go to war against the beast or against the enemy, the things in the world which seek to undermine our faith. So let us live faithful as Ignatius of Antioch.